here we are at 7. Now, for those of you that are just joining this workshop for the first time, I just want to talk about the progression of the steps and what they are doing and how they are designed to move us from one step to the other. The way I like to talk about it is that each step carries a charge or creates a charge inside of us. A great example of that is step 1, right? That we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Once I accept that to my innermost self, it means that I'm in trouble. I'm having an existential crisis. I've got a serious problem that is damaging and hurting my life. And there's within the means I have available to me at this moment, there's nothing I can do about it. That is the definition of an existential crisis. And an existential crisis always has, as a component to it, existential anxiety. My God, I'm in trouble and there's nothing within that I know of to do something about what's going on. Well, that crisis now creates an incredible charge. We're charged with a lot of energy. Bill says that recovery is based upon a pedestal of hopelessness. So that step is designed for us to feel that sense of hopelessness. Well, that's a horrible feeling. I don't want to be hopeless. That's not a condition you can live with. People that are in a hopeless condition end up suicidal in life. But that charge prepares us for what's going to come in step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And think of sanity as soundness of thinking. And so now step 2 comes along and gives us hope. Now, the way that we've been going through the 12 steps this time is we're taking Ernie Larson's suggestion that we're taking a second first step. The second first step is talking about our powerlessness over our emotional dependence, over our immaturity, and that our lives have become unmanageable as a result of that. That's what the second first step looks like. The second step comes along and says, you can grow up. There is hope for you. It's possible to grow up. You're not sick. You have a gross disorder. You're stuck. That's the message that's behind step 2 for us as we work the second set of steps in our recovery. So now step 2 gives us hope. It resolves the crisis that happened in step 1. I no longer have to be hopeless. There is a possibility of finding another way of life. But faith without action is just hollow. It's hollow. It's empty. It's an empty promise. Something needs to happen. Faith without action is just a fantasy. So now step 2 creates another charge. Yes, I want my life to be different. I long for that change. In one way, we could say I long to be free, because we do. That sense of freedom is so important to us. So now we get this charge. First of all, it resolves the charge in step 1, but now it creates another charge. That there is a possibility for my life to be different, for me to be different. And that sets me up for step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 3 we talk about is making a commitment to growing up. Making a commitment to end the old way of life and to begin our new way of life. A way of life that is based on emotional sobriety and emotional maturity, and not so dependent on our environment for support. That's the commitment we're making in step 3. So like I've said before, it resolves the fact that now, hope without action, I've now made some affirmative action. I've made this commitment. And so now I have a commitment. What do I do with it? Well, that's where step 4 comes along and now resolves that charge. Sit down and make an inventory of your emotional dependence. Look at how it's been riddled through your life, when it started, how it's continued, how it's manifested itself. What has the effects of your emotional dependency been on yourself, on life? What's the big lie behind it? The big lie being that I'm only okay if things are the way I want them to be. That I don't have the ability to make things okay unless they go my way. That's unbelievable, put down in terms of who we are and what our possibilities are. So now, step 4, we're starting to look at this stuff. And now we sit there and we see all this, and I'm imploding with all this energy, and I need to share it with someone else. An enlightened witness, we talk about, someone that can sit down and be with us, that has developed, has been through their suffering, and has some wisdom as a result of it, and can sit and give us some feedback about what's going on. And so we do that, and we see what's going on, and we see the extent and severity of our problems. Bill Klaus, he said at one point, it's never been so starkly revealed to me, this problem. And that's what happens to us when we get to this point in the program. And so now I'm seeing the issues. Now I need to do something about it. That's where step 6 comes along. We're entirely ready to have these defects of character removed, to have God remove these defects of character. And we talked about how step 6 is preparing us for step 7, and that step 6 is taking a look at the function that our character defaults, we call them, not defects, because they're defaults, they're adaptations, that these adaptations have had in our life. And we need to understand that just wishing them to be gone is not going to happen. We have to have a deep understanding of what function they serve in our life and be able to address that so that we can let go of them. That's the work we did in step number 6. And now we take that, we get ready to let go, and we said, okay, I'm going to need some help to remove my shortcomings. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So let's take a look at what this step is about. So as I said before, and I really think this is very important to keep in mind, because this step 6 and 7, are the pivots towards emotional sobriety. This is when we pivot towards developing emotional sobriety in our life. We've laid the foundation, and now we're aiming at developing the best possible attitude we can towards ourselves, towards others, and towards life itself. The best possible attitude. I went into this in a lot of detail in terms of one way to look at this is in terms of what we move away from and what we move towards in our recovery. I'll continue with a bit of a discussion about that a little later on in my talk today. But this is what step 6 and 7 is about. It's our pivot towards emotional sobriety. That's the best possible attitude that we can bring to our life. Well, Bill says this. He says, since this step specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider what humility is and what the practice of it can mean to our lives. So let's pause and do that. Let's take Bill's suggestion and pause for a second and look at a definition of humility and what it is. So humility is the quality of being humble. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? But it's characterized by a low focus on the self. A low focus on the self. See, it's the antidote to this sense of personal importance that is so cultivated in our culture, that is so promoted in our culture, and we'll get into some more of that. He goes on to say, or the dictionary, the American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychological Terms, they say it's an accurate, not an over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishments and one's worth, and an acknowledgement, and this is the key here, of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. So take that in for a minute. A low focus on the self. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that now I need to have the perspective that Don Miguel Ruiz was talking about, that it's not all about me. And that is the opposite of what we're raised with, this sense of personal importance. It's about me, 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 me. So low focus on the self. Now I start to integrate into my consciousness the idea that, it's not all about me. I'm a part of this world, but I'm not the center of this world. I may be the center of my universe, but I'm not the center of the universe. And an accurate, not an over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishments and worth. This is back to what we talk about when we talk about that emotional sobriety is having an appropriate and honest alignment with reality, an appropriate and honest relationship with reality, the reality of who we are, what I've accomplished, who I am in my life. And then, most importantly, an acknowledgement, being able to own that I have limitations, that I am imperfect, that I make mistakes, there's things I don't know, there's gaps in knowledge, and so on. And being willing to stand before you naked. That's what this is about. That's what humility is. And being okay with all of that. Not feeling like that makes me less than or better than. It just makes me who I am. Very important part of our recovery experience. Bill goes on to say that we have been demanding more than our share of security, prestige, and romance. See, we have been bitten by this idea, I am more the more I have. See, that's one of the things that our culture really infuses and programs us to believe, that I am more the more I have. So we've been demanding more of our share of security, prestige, and romance. Because if I have everything, if I have all of this, then I'll be okay. But then he realizes, he says, never was there enough of what I thought I needed. Because those things are not the solution. They are not going to give us and help us develop a real, true, authentic self-esteem that's based on humility. Those ideas, demanding more than our share, that's our emotional dependency showing up. That's the idea that self-support, not self-support, but environmental support instead of self-support, that I need the environment to give me what I need to be okay. But there's never enough of what I thought I needed. I was at this big NA international conference in Hawaii. I forgot what year it was. And this one fellow from England got up and he says, I used to say my name is Sam and I'm a recovering addict. And he says, today I say I'm Sam and I am addicted to more. No matter what it is, I'm just addicted to more. And I can relate to that. Very much so. So Bill said that we had lacked the perspective that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions are getting our way were not the purpose of living. This is where, when he talks about having the cart before the horse, it starts to make sense. You see, when we make more important than, and having more important than being, we're in big trouble. We're way out of balance. A characteristic of emotional sobriety is bringing our lives into balance with reality. There's nothing wrong with having things as long as it's balanced with being. as long as it doesn't become more important than who you are or define who you are. It's a part of you, it's not all of you. This is the way Fritz Perls says it. The self-actualizer expects the possible. The one who wants to actualize a concept attempts the impossible. What did Bill call this? An impossible way of life, right? Wanting the environment to make me whole. The self-actualizer expects the possible. That person is now having an appropriate and honest relationship with themselves and with life. They're grounded. They're aligned with who they are. The one who wants to actualize a concept attempts the impossible, because this concept of who we are is riddled with absolutes. And there is nothing absolute about being a human being, except that absolute is that you're not absolute. You're absolutely not absolute in any sense. So, step 7 introduces us to the importance, the difference between having versus being. And the effect of our culture is based on a having culture. As I said, the definition is I am more the more I have. This is why Bill said, never was there enough of what I needed. The attainment of humility is the goal of each of the 12 steps, because we have to undo all of this nonsense that we've learned, that we've been programmed to have. We lacked the perspective that character building and spiritual values had to come first. We got so lost into having, thinking that that was the solution, we lost perspective. And here, humility is obtained by facing our personal limitations and learning to accept and appreciate our need for help, to grow and to become more emotionally mature and differentiated. I like to say that ignorance and incompetence are not crimes punishable by death. They are not felonies. Help comes from a lot of unexpected directions in our lives. Bill talks about that we reluctantly come to grips with those serious character flaws that made problem drinkers of us in the first place. Flaws which must be dealt with to prevent a retreat into alcoholism once again, into our insanity. And the goal for recovery in terms of, aiming at the best possible attitude is we strive for progress, not spiritual perfection. That's why we ask to get these defects of character removed. Some of them may get resolved. A lot of other parts, a lot of other things that we struggle with, we'll have to continue to grind away at dealing with them through the rest of our life. So, we have to be careful. Humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings is not passive. It's not saying I'm turning this over to God and he's going to remove these things. It's meaning I am now setting my intention to get the help I need to start cleaning up some of this behavior that's causing me trouble. To get the help I need to start growing up and start unhooking people from my unreasonable expectations. And a lot of people think about turning this over, and it creates what John Welwood called a spiritual bypass. He says, when we are spiritually bypassing, we often use the goal of awakening or liberation to rationalize what I call premature transcendence. Premature transcendence. Trying to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we have fully faced and made peace with it. And then we tend to use absolute truth to disparage or dismiss relative human needs, feelings, psychological problems, relational difficulties, and developmental deficits. I used to do a lot of these workshops in the South Bay. It was called The Unfolding Self with Teresa Taduri, just a brilliant singer-songwriter. And we used to do these things at least once a month at this community center. And she was the songstress for Marianne Williamson. the Course of Miracles. And she had done a lot of spiritual work on herself. And she says, I got to the point in my spiritual development where I would forgive you before you even stepped on my foot. She goes, it got ridiculous. She goes, the way that I was manifesting this stuff was I was not grounded anymore. And that's what Wellwood is warning us about. So let's go back to what I started to talk about last time is what do we move away from? And what do we move towards? What part of the best possible attitude we can take? Well, we move away from being ashamed of having problems. We now embrace a whole different attitude towards them. We become curious and we cultivate a compassion towards ourselves and starting to understand that these problems that I'm having are adaptations to the culture and to the family that I grew up in. So we don't now let our problems define us like we did before. Our self-esteem got attached to whether I had problems or not, which was ridiculous. But now our self-esteem is based on how we face and deal with our problems. So we don't let our problems define us. What defines us is the effort and attitude we take to dealing with them. What a shift in our consciousness. See, that's where freedom has started to be created. We move away from avoidance, from avoiding difficult situations, from avoiding our pain, from avoiding suffering. We don't become sadomasochistic and move to get hurt. But when we feel something, we start to learn how to lean into it rather than run away from it. That becomes an important thing. So we take the hits that we need to take. We now learn how to confront ourselves. And I say this to people all the time, is that the more I take responsibility and pressure myself to change, the less I get pressured from other people because they don't have to. When other people are telling me to change, it's because I have abdicated my personal responsibility in my life. We move away from self-criticism and self-contempt, hating ourselves for not being what we think we should be. We move away from identification with our false self. And what we move towards is more self-support, accepting ourselves as we are, and be able to be on our side rather than be on our back. See, all of these things are going to be necessary for us to lay this foundation for our relationship with ourselves if we're going to be able to take on steps 8 and 9 that are coming up. So that's for next time. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys about these steps. So let me invite Julia. So the floor is open. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what I shared and your experience with steps 7 as well.
You know, I didn't take notes, but I did write little words, things that jumped out, and it's the stuff that, without looking, I know I underlined in the 12 and 12 for over the years, and a couple of thoughts on this is the word accurate. And that was the definition of humility. Accurate self-appraisal, or that accuracy, comes in, ebbs and flows, right? And this comes up as, part of, there's another word that Bill uses quite a bit, like delusion, right? There's this kind of both a lack of clarity in how I see myself, and also like a mythology that I have about who I'm supposed to be, and and that all gets in the way. And getting to a point of clearing this stuff out
Yeah.
and starting to trust that it's okay to not be perfect, and that I can have gaps in knowledge, like that other the slide had it, and that I won't be erased if I'm not perfect, things like that, and just again, trust is where it keeps popping up. Really just takes practice. This is the ongoing work of emotional sobriety for me. And the one other idea that came up for me was about humility was about not being the center of the universe. And Don Miguel Ruiz, in one of his follow-up books, I don't know if it was The Fifth Agreement or one of the others, talks about being the secondary character in other people's lives. And he does it in this way, which descriptively, is wonderful. He describes like walking into a movie theater and seeing what looks like parts of my life, but through other people's eyes, and how they weren't focused on me. And I was the secondary character, like, and just, he uses that to illustrate that I'm not the center of the universe, and I don't know everything that everyone is thinking, and how they perceive me is completely different than how I perceive myself. And like that level of awareness that, kind of, takes the pressure off, right? Just lets the steam out of the pot a little bit so I can, you know, um, not get so wrapped up in self, right? And start to have humility in a way which then allows me to work on these character defaults. So
Yeah,
that
well,
those,
that establishes that low focus on self, right? That we
yeah,
talk about is so important in terms of humility.
yeah,
I
And
love what
then
Alan put in the discussion. He goes, an addict's lament. I don't think that much of myself, but I'm pretty much all I think of. I love it. That's great, Alan. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Alan.
I remember how surprised and how like just it blew my mind, when I learned in this program, most people aren't thinking about you all the time. They're thinking about themselves also, especially in the rooms. And that was, and also the idea that I could be wrong sometimes and that wasn't, a personal or not know, and that wasn't a personal failing. And that's something that I've integrated. Yeah, and I really like that you emphasized, Alan, that this is an active process. We just don't just think about handing it over, pray, and then go on with our lives and do everything the same as we were doing before. Um, and one of the small things that I do, to help, because I'm also very self-focused, is I start every morning with gratitudes, and I also say gratitudes for all the good things that are happening to others. Um, and it's a little tiny thing, right? But it nudges me in the right direction. Um, let's see, another note that I took was I think Roger said in one of the podcasts, in the 12 steps, we don't transcend humanness. And I'm sorry if I'm or Joe, sorry, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting this. But that being in part of the messiness and the discomfort really is part of it. And for me, I have to keep learning the same lessons over and over again. And with time, I get more clarity. And I've realized recently I have a lot of things that I take for granted and expectations that I wasn't even aware of. And when those aren't met, they cause me a lot of pain. Um, and I didn't see them. Like I really just it seemed so obvious that those should be the way that they should be, that it wasn't even a question, if that makes sense. And it's uncomfortable to be willing to, admit that that's not the way that it has to be. And because I have, like you said, because this is painful for me doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. But I need to get curious about it. And one of the biggest things that's helped me in this program, and I'll finish with that, but is I used to run away from everything. I used to run away from my problems, smooth them over, drink over them, disengage in other ways, and learning to move towards them. And it's tough. It is definitely progress, not
Yeah.
perfection.
Tag, you're it, Jimmy.
So thank you, Alan. Thank you, Julia and Tom. So much of what operated me, even before I got into 12-step recovery, before I got sober, after I got physically sober, physically abstinent from bulimia, was, I was a people pleaser. I did benevolent things because I had this need of wanting people to, embrace me, acknowledge me, and I put myself in a pretzel. It's like if I do this, then, I'll be appreciated or something.
Yep.
And my acts of whether the benevolence or something or generosity, there was always, there was a payback in that, you know. And boy, was I disillusioned. Um, and as I've come to be an active participant in my recovery, which really started 24 years ago. This process, and I can't, I know there's something that I crossed the line in the respect that, it didn't matter, I wasn't preoccupied in needing that acknowledgement or what people thought of what I might have said or what I've done. And I started not taking things, personally. It was not about me. And it wasn't, I can't say, I went through the steps and progression. This was not linear. It was just more organic. It was a process. And, one thing that I just jotted down, and uh, what I've realized is that humility, like other things, humility is a process, not the destination. And thank God I have the willingness and the open mindedness to keep coming back. That's what brings me back where I sit in this chair on Thursday nights. Because I don't know what insight I may get. What it means is, cultivating. And I'll just finish by reading, and I shared this at a meeting earlier this week, a passage from step 7, on page 70 in the second paragraph. Nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than may be required just for sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming truly happy. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose or in adversity be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency.
There it is. That's emotional sobriety right there. That's it.
I'll just leave, I went through really severe financial instability issues back about 14 years ago. And, I relied, even though that I felt, trapped in the sense of, limited in what I could do, but I went to meetings on a regular basis. I listened to the music that I like to listen to, which moves my feet and body, that takes me to my happy place. And it was like in The Tale of Two Cities. The opening line. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And the best of times, it's really was a key part in how really my faith and humility really got cultivated. And I needed to go through, whether I needed to or not, that's what happened. And for that, I'm really, really heartfelt, grateful for that experience.